rebuilding Ukraine will be difficult. The post-war reconstruction of Ukraine is likely to be the largest project of its kind since the Second World War. The planning of the reconstruction process and the development of rules for the allocation and control of the funds that will one day be spent on it are taking place in the seclusion of cabinets. Coordinating the massive effort and consulting with foreign partners may be difficult, but there are many more challenges. What will the overall scale of destruction be? The Russian invasion is causing enormous material damage. The infrastructure and housing destroyed was often decades old and in a deplorable state, but the cost of rebuilding it at today's prices is staggering. In March 2023, the World Bank estimated that $411 billion would be needed to rebuild Ukraine after the war. A few months earlier, in July 2022, the government in Kyiv unveiled a $750 billion reconstruction plan. Without getting into a debate about whose calculations are closer to the truth, the fact is that the losses have increased, partly due to the destruction of the Novaya Kakhovka Dam. For a long time to come, the inhabitants of the region will feel not only the effects of the flooding, but also the consequences of the absence of the 240-kilometer-long reservoir and hydroelectric power station that were part of the dam on the Dnieper. Given the ongoing fighting and rocket attacks, the final extent of the destruction may yet come as a surprise. It is possible that the Kremlin is preparing for a prolonged war of attrition, combined with the systematic destruction of its neighbors' infrastructure and economic potential. At the moment, many states and international institutions are supporting Ukraine and constantly promising to provide funds for the reconstruction of war damage. In June 2023, at the Ukraine Recovery Conference in London, concrete amounts were pledged. A total of more than $60 billion in aid was promised. This is not enough, however, and the search for additional funds continues. Kyiv is seeking the transfer of frozen Russian central bank funds for reconstruction and is calling for the confiscation of the assets of Kremlin-supporting oligarchs, but it is unclear whether this will happen. The idea is opposed by some politicians and some in the financial community, who fear it would set a dangerous precedent. In mid-2022, Ukrainian Prime Minister Denis Shmyhal estimated that $300,500 billion worth of Russian assets were frozen in the West, so the game is worth the candle. Build and maintain trust. G7 members have announced long-term security commitments for Ukraine. The plan is to help Ukraine build an army that can defend itself and deter future attack. Security guarantees for Ukraine mean deterrence against any future armed aggression by Russia or any other state. They are a necessary precondition for the reconstruction, development, prosperity, and full integration of Ukraine into the EU, and are crucial for security and stability in the region. Ukraine's international perception is also negatively affected by the problem of corruption in the country. This is a major risk due to Ukraine's dependence on external aid. There may be less willingness abroad to provide financial support, and some entrepreneurs and investors may give up on entering the local market if they learn from the media that some of the money from the West is not going where it should. Ukraine needs to build a strong foundation for international trust so that the public will believe that funding for state reconstruction will be spent properly and in a way that is transparent to the institutions funding the process, denying the country. In a recent interview with The Guardian newspaper, Defense Minister Oleksiy Reznikov estimated that Ukraine is the most heavily mined country in the world. In some sections of the front line, there are as many as 5 mines per square meter, he said. And data collected by Human Rights Watch shows that the Russians are using more than 5 kinds of such weapons during an invasion. The Ukrainians lack the manpower and equipment to clear the country of mines and dangerous unexploded ordnance. They are unlikely to tackle the problem on their own, as it will take a lot of time and money. The World Bank has estimated the cost at $38 billion over 10 years. There is no shortage of dangerous mines and unexploded ordnance, especially on agricultural land, some of which is unsuitable for cultivation, in part because of soil contamination. Every year that land remains fallow will have a negative impact on the Ukrainian economy and increase the number of citizens dependent on social assistance. What is the future for the Ukrainian economy? In half of the countries involved in post-war reconstruction, per capita gross domestic product remains below the pre-war trend for 25 years, and only in 1 in 3 cases does it return to pre-war levels after 5 years of fighting, according to an analysis by the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, which looked at the impact of several hundred armed conflicts between 1816 and 2014, a period of almost 2 centuries. The war in Ukraine has been going on for a year and a half and has taken a huge toll on the country's infrastructure and economy. Reconstruction will be a massive, multi-year undertaking beyond the capacity of any single institution and will require international public-private engagement. The World Bank calculated in March this year that the cost of this reconstruction will be at least $411 billion over 10 years, covering the 1-year period from Russia's invasion of Ukraine on 24 February 2022 to the first anniversary of the outbreak of war in February this year. By contrast, the Kyiv School of Economics recently reported that total losses to Ukraine's infrastructure caused by Russia's invasion had exceeded $150 billion by the end of June, but were increasing with each day of war. Central to the success of post-war reconstruction is the issue of security and stability. Conducting reconstruction in conditions of active conflict or fragile peace is, at best, highly complex, with higher transaction costs and limited effectiveness of reconstruction efforts. Conflict has a destabilizing effect, deterring investment and new economic ventures. Population decline. According to the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, some 13 million people were forced to flee their homes in the year of the Russian invasion of Ukraine alone, and there are some 8 million Ukrainian refugees across Europe. The ongoing war is also causing high levels of military and civilian casualties and contributing to a falling birth rate. Ukraine, already one of the most populous countries in Europe before the war, is thus on the brink of a demographic catastrophe that will hamper its post-war reconstruction. The question not often asked in the public debate is, who will live in the country after the war? In 2019, Ukraine's population, excluding the territories occupied by Russia for several years, is estimated at 37.3 million. It is not known how many people currently live in the area controlled by the government in Kiev, but it is generally estimated to be less than 30 million. Some left soon after the invasion began. Some of the war refugees have returned to Ukraine, others are delaying the decision, but there are also those who have nowhere to return to, or have ruled it out for fear of Russian soldiers. It is difficult to predict the scale of re-emigration, but among the Ukrainian refugees and their adult children, there is certainly no shortage of people who will make a life for themselves beyond the borders of their own country. After the end of hostilities, some of the men, who have been banned from leaving the country for several months, will usually join their relatives living abroad. Departures may increase if an economic crisis emerges and financial aid from the West proves disproportionate to needs and expectations. According to the Ukrainian Institute of the Future, the birth rate has already fallen below 1, and in a few years, there will be twice as many pensioners as working people. The decline in the number of people of working age and the rapid aging of the population will limit the benefits of rebuilding the country and have a negative impact on economic development. The Institute of Demographic and Social Research of the National Academy of Sciences of Ukraine forecasts a population of between 24 and 32 million in 2030. Russia's aggression against Ukraine has exacerbated the country's already critical demographic situation, bringing it to the brink of catastrophe. The ongoing war is resulting in large numbers of military casualties, mainly men in their prime, civilians, and a refugee population of several million with unclear prospects of return. In addition, the war has contributed to a decline in the fertility plans of the younger generations due to the uncertainty of living conditions in the years to come. As a result, all current projections for Ukraine's population after the war are pessimistic. They predict that by 2030 the country's population could be one of the oldest in Europe, with a high percentage of sick people, invalids, post-traumatic stress disorder, or depression.